Okay, we are going to go ahead and start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from today. My name is Helena Shilomboleni, and I'm going to be your moderator for this session, which is Scaling Climate Smart Agriculture in Eastern and Southern Africa for Resilient Food Systems, Lessons Learned from the GCP4 projects. Monica, would you kindly put up the screen, please? With my presentation. Slides, okay. As we are waiting, we do have a very exciting line of speakers lined up. I'm very excited today. And just briefly, if we can go to the next slide, please. Here are the session objectives. Is that we will share results and lessons learned from GCP4 projects, as well as imagine pathways that can facilitate the broad uptake of CSA, climate smart agriculture practices, and transform food systems in East and Southern Africa. Our participants will present, they will present the evidence on addressing barriers and opportunities to scaling CSA-related innovations, business models, incentives, and finance schemes, including the role of public-private partnerships. And then they will also tackle the various paradoxes that emerge from GCP4 projects and offer practical insights on how to use them productively and creatively. So next slide, please. So here is the list of our speakers today. We will have opening remarks from Paul van der Locht from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands, as well as Bruce Campbell, who is the director of the CGIAR Research Program on Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security, CCAFS. And then we will get to hear some examples from 3 projects. From Sitsa Velema, who's at the Wageningen University, from Domenico, who is at Wageningen and the Montpellier Business School, and from Gloria Otieno, who is at Biodiversity International. After that, we will have some breakout sessions. We will put you in groups of 2 or 3, and we will, where you will each get to discuss more with the presenters, and then with a few questions we'll put up, we'll let you know later. And then after that, we'll get reflections from Marieke Vansche, who is at SNV, Netherlands Development Organization, and again, Paul from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. And without further ado, please, I welcome you, Paul, to give your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody to this session. I hope you've had good discussions already in the first day, and I think this is a very important one. So I look forward to a very frank and open discussion based on the research that has been done. My name is Paul van der Locht, and I'm head of the Food and Nutrition Security team. And before this, I was in the climate finance team. And I went out to the food people and I said, you know, pay attention to climate and indicate like which investments are relevant in relation to climate adaptation. And I've seen that evolve. I think going from, well, we're aiming at more productivity. So when there's more productivity, there's less use of land, there's less use of water. So we're doing fine for the climate. To now a strategy that also relates to data, availability of know-how on weather patterns and increased insecurity, adaptive practices, which often are very low end. It doesn't all have to be sort of highly sophisticated seeds, but it can be as simple as planning of planting seasons, etc. But also the insurance side and the importance of looking at the risks that are now there. I think one of the things that struck me is I had a discussion yesterday with somebody from the World Bank who said food security is where climate was 15 years ago. Both in like looking at it from a system perspective and from a political point of view, and from finance. And I tend to agree. I think like if I look at the way we talked about renewable energy 10 years ago, I don't know if the Dutch people among us probably remember our prime minister in an election debate referring to windmills, saying they only turn because there's subsidies. To the current position of the Netherlands, saying that both ourselves and the rest of Europe should be much more ambitious, and windmills are cost efficient and better alternatives for fossil fuels. And in the question about like the search for paradoxes, I see the same sort of direction of thought. Like there is no paradox between climate smart operations and a sustainable income. I mean, climate, like adapting to climate is a necessity. So there's no paradox in the private sector development and adapting to climate. So I'm really curious, like what came out of the research, because I think that's sort of asking the question is moving the debate in the wrong direction. I think there should not be commercial activities and there cannot be commercial activities when farmers are cannot sort of count on their harvests, and when markets rely on production that is not sustainable. So I'm really curious where that debate will lead, and I hope that it will lead to the conclusion that indeed we can and we should sort of reframe our mind around agriculture, but not only agriculture, but also diets, about markets, about access to markets, about international markets, or the whole food system discussion, and say we can only feed the world if we now start from what resources are available and go from there to what healthy and nutritious diets we need to provide for our populations. So this is really on right in the middle of my field of interest. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And I hope it's also going to be helpful in the year ahead with a lot of political debate on how we should move forward between now and 2030 or now and 2050 in the the food system discussion and the food system summit in September. So thank you very much for joining, and I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I'll talk to you again at the end of this session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Paul, for those opening remarks and for really setting the scene to take a food systems perspective. So I'm really excited also to hear this from our speaker. So let me now hand over to Monica to give Bruce's remarks. They are recorded, so please do put that up and we'll take a listen to what he. We just bear with us for a few minutes.
I got it.
A few seconds. Great, thank you.
My pleasure to talk about scaling climate smart agriculture and introduce the GCP4 portfolio. So we've just written a report, Actions to Transform Food Systems Under Climate Change. We see the challenges as really significant, and so therefore a real need to focus on a set of actions. There's 11 outlined in the report. I just want to mention 3 of them. Unlocking billions in sustainable finance. We need to get much more money into the agricultural sector, and it has to reach farmers on the ground. This largely has to be private sector funding. We have to think about the policy and institutional changes that enable transformation. And we have to think about our own work as well as researchers, transforming innovation systems to deliver impact at scale. So let me get to the GCP4 portfolio. It's around scaling climate smart agriculture. So there's many great technologies out there that can be used. The real challenge is the word scaling. How do we get to 500 million farmers globally? How do we get to 60 million in Africa? So the GCP portfolio I see as an ambitious partnership with its eyes on the enabling conditions. It consists of 8 projects, and while it covers a number of topics, I just wanted to highlight that it does have a particular focus on business models, private sector involvement. And this is one of the key areas where we think we need to focus on if we're going to achieve a transformation. Why an ambitious partnership? So it's joined up the CGIAR system and the Dutch innovation system, with a number of centers participating under the umbrella of CCAFS program, and in the Dutch system, a number of universities participating. And I think if we think about transformation, partnerships are going to be at the key of making it happen. We can't do it by ourselves, none of us. And perhaps most important, not only the research partners, but all the other partners that we're working with. So the government agencies, so that we can work on policy-related issues, non-governmental organizations, so we can get right to the ground with working with farmers, national universities, so we can also help build capacity in the South, and perhaps most important, given what I said earlier, private sector players. I haven't been able to put all the logos on the slide, but these are a selection of them. And then I mentioned the need to focus on policy and the institutional environment. And so I just want to give 2 examples. The first one comes from a livestock project with greenhouse gas emissions. Now, I should also say that these projects have not completed 3 years yet. So to expect policy outcomes from them is perhaps a little bit tough. Nonetheless, this project has achieved some formidable outcomes. So CCAFS has implemented the first ever Tier 2 greenhouse gas emission inventory for Ethiopia, which is the foundation of the UNFCCC processes, the NDC processes, setting out the country commitments. Based on the input, there's a chance to unlock millions of dollars for climate smart livestock investments. And if this works in Ethiopia, it unlocks further investments in other countries, so bringing in the needed finance into the sector. The livestock sector has been transformed from essentially a climate laggard into a leading subsector in the NDC in Ethiopia, helping also to inform other subsectors in terms of their methodology. So this is a really great achievement from this project. Another project is working on fertilizers, emissions, adaptation, and food security. And they've also managed to get their work to the attention of Africa institutions. So low greenhouse gas emission fertilizer recommendations are intended to inform the next Abuja summit on fertilizers. And also at the country level, engagement with country governments are informing national changes in the national fertilizer recommendations. I don't have time to go to all the 8 projects, so I just wanted to list another 3 achievements. And these are a result of actually bringing work from different projects together and integrating them, for example, into the upcoming Ethiopia's CSA strategy. So this is going to set the framework for the rollout of climate smart agriculture in Ethiopia, and a number of projects have contributed towards this. We've also got the attention of Africa-wide institutions, so the Africa Climate Policy Centers, effort on low emission development for livelihood in Africa has taken up some of the GCP results. And similarly, the GCP results are brought into the UN Economic Commission for Africa's climate resilient development policies initiatives. So thanks very much. I just want to reiterate, transformation is absolutely crucial For that, we need really ambitious partnerships. We need ambitious theories of change, tackling some of the key issues around those theory of change, some of which are finance, others are related to the policy environment. Thanks very much.
Okay, so thank you, Bruce, for that fantastic presentation. And now we do have 3 of the project leaders from GCP4 projects who are here with us today. And so in this next session, so they will give pitches of their projects in terms of giving us concrete examples of what worked well when it comes to scaling, what didn't and why. So I'm happy to introduce again Sitze Velema, who is who was also our keynote speaker this afternoon, Domenico D'Antoni, as well as Gloria Otieno. So over to you guys, please take over.
Who do you like to start, Helena?
Okay, please you do go ahead, Sitze.
Okay, thank you. And thank you all for joining this session in which we try to reflect on work that is related to climate change. And I am going to share some thoughts with you based on a project called Inclusive Low Emission Development, ILED, in East African dairy. And it's linked up with a couple of partners working in Tanzania and Kenya. And I use this opportunity to see how far we can go with what may be called paradoxical thinking. So this project set out from the realization that if we look at dairy production, but also trade and consumption, it's very diverse. And there's an enormous biophysical variability. On the other hand, dairy is an important part on the policy agenda for low emission development related to the greenhouse gas emissions. And following from that is a kind of policy bias towards intensification and commercialization. So that has a very specific intervention logic. And that's not easy to reconcile. So what we try to do in our thinking is, well, maybe I discovered a couple of paradoxes. One of them is the paradox between adaptation and mitigation. So the kind of dominant intervention logic is more mitigation oriented. It wants to really avoid any emission of low greenhouse gases. But that runs the risk that you bypass the enormous variety of adaptation practices. So where institutes like ILRI are working on trying to move towards intensification, may neglect all the adaptation practices that you see on the ground, and may even push farmers in a direction that is kind of not fitting the logic in which they operate. So one of the possible ways of reconciling this paradox or handling it, making it productive, has to do with contextual design. So try to be careful with thinking along very generic recipes, but see what's the kind of space that you can create for contextual design. Another paradox that I discovered in thinking about the work that we do is the paradox between resilience and transformation. So if I listen to the speech of Bruce, he emphasizes transformation, transform the system. On the other hand, if you look at how people cope with climate change, it's already something that they can be resilient. And also that's a paradox. It's not necessarily leading to attention, but maybe they can be brought together. One of the things that we do in the project is also to then support what I labeled territorial governance. So not only focusing on influencing, let's say, the national agendas like the NDCs, but also see how at lower governance levels, you can find ways in which resilience and transformation are brought together. And that can, for example, be done in, we worked with local governments, wherein it was already something to bring together the dairy-focused departments with the environmental departments. and both were working on adaptation, and they found ways to liaise with the more transformative aspects induced by policy. And the final paradox that I could think of was the paradox between what I call diversity and closure. If you think about scaling, and there's literature from the kind of organization sciences on that, it says a condition for scaling is that there's closure. There's a limitation of the choices still available. And that may contrast with local diversity, with local capacities to handle climate change. And then I thought, what does it mean then for your thinking about adoption? And one of the literatures that I like talks about affordances and the conditions for unpacking that. So that means that in terms of intervention, you try to see what is it that intensification practices or commercialization practice offer, but you emphasize that there should be conditions for unpacking those affordances, rather than being concerned with only uptaking the solution that you already fixed in the laboratory. And this is work, for example, by Dominic Glover at the Institute of Development Studies that tries to refine our thinking about adoption. So these were my 5 minutes for reflecting on paradoxes in the project that I work with.
Wow, thank you, Sitze. That was really fantastic. That gives us a lot of food for thought, and I know that is going to generate a lot of discussion in the breakout sessions. I hope so. Anyways, Domenico, let us go to you, please, for you to give your pitch.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Elena. Can you hear me well? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Excellent. So my name is Domenico Dentoni. I've been leading the project in GCP4 called Organizing Business Models for Smallholder Resilience. So our focus clearly was on business models, and we focused particularly in Zimbabwe and Malawi, our work. And what I will try to do in these few minutes is to give you one specific story, really grounded in what we have learned in Malawi. So in Malawi, we have been studying dairy communities, and basically we were really focusing at the intercross between the communities and basically a business model that has been started in the 80s. And the business model really grounds on the pass-on program. In dairy, I think many of you are aware of how it works. It's basically programs that start from from introducing a few cows, from the outside, and basically as the calves are born, are passed to other people within a community. So the basic model is that it grows as more cows are grown. Now, within that context that's present from the 80s, there has been some climate smart agricultural interventions that have been notable in the past 10 years. And that has to do in particular with introducing better quality checks in the milk that of course comes from the cows. The idea from a systemic perspective of having better quality checks has to do with the fact that if we have better milk, more safe, more with a higher quality, then we can also have farmers that have more funds to invest, for example, in improved fodder, which is in particular very important for both climate adaptation and mitigation. So now what is really interesting is that within Malawi, and in particular within the central region of Malawi, in different milk working groups, this intervention that was really thought out from this systemic perspective had very different outcomes, which I'm going to outline quickly. In milk working groups that are really taking place around villages that had a prevalence of ethnic groups of Ngoni, what we have seen after ethnographic work in the past 3 years is that the problems related to mastitis with cows have actually been continuing to really make the sour milk sour, meaning that the quality checks were bringing to reject most of the milk that was needed for making the system work on a local scale. Transport issues, in particular from where the cows really are up to the tank, which sometimes is 5 to 15 km. That was a very important bottleneck in the model. Third, the electricity. So electricity was definitely a constraint in terms of the tank sometimes having no electricity. And around that, what we have noticed is that sometimes the devil is really in the detail, such as because of the transport taking between 5 and 15 km, and the temperature being really hot during the day, you may have problems when you bring the milk to the tank. That you can do it only in the night, because during the day it's too hot. The milk deteriorates as you bring it to the source. So, but if you do it by the night, then you need to have electricity so that you can actually see the outcome of the quality check. So these are small details, but they may have an important ripple effect. Let me give you an example of what happens in different communities that have a Chewa majority. Because of the Chewa culture, what we've learned is that jealousy in villages is a very important factor that needs to be considered. So when someone starts having 2 or 3 cows and having space for investing, actually that's an issue for neighbors, because the disparities within communities are very important. That means that there seems to be a trade-off, some issues that has to do with paradoxes between the feelings of brotherhoods that are important in communities and actually having investment on climate smart agriculture. So this basically leads us to a conclusion. The conclusion is that what we've seen as outcomes of our project is that there is a growth or some aspects of scaling in terms of informal market with CSA intervention. But this is much slower than what the ones that thought about the intervention actually took place. So that I think that the final consideration that we may have here is to what extent are we open to the fact that communities are adapting the CSA model that we have in mind, or what we consider as a failure or a success of a CSA, depending on how much has been adapted by different local communities. I'll pause it here, and I look forward for a discussion later with all of you.
Yes, Domenico, that was also really a fantastic pitch, and I'm sure it generate a lot of interesting conversation afterwards. So now, please let me give over to Gloria to present her pitch.
Thank you very much, Elena, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gloria Otieno, and I'm pitching on behalf of the team from Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT. And Carlo Fada is here, who is the leader of the project, but I'm going to present for the team. So our project was citizen science approach to climate smart and nutrition sensitive value chains for food security in Uganda and Ethiopia. So we were faced with a challenge of climate change affecting farmers' ability to access superior varieties of whatever they grow, and not being able to access these varieties meant that we have to find somewhere to get these varieties. So we engaged with the national gene banks in Kenya, in Uganda, in Tanzania, and in Ethiopia to provide us with materials that we could screen and evaluate participatorily with farmers, hence the word citizen science. So we engaged with farmers and breeding programs to evaluate these materials for their drought tolerance, for their early maturity, for their yield performance, and also for the nutritional aspects such as iron, zinc, and calcium, which are very important for nutrition, as well as protein for beans and for finger millet and for wheat and for barley that we were engaging in. So we kind of like selected best performing varieties based on both climate and nutrition. And now we wanted to upscale these varieties to other users through either seed value chains or product value chains. So one thing we did was to work with the National Agricultural Research Organization, the breeding programs, to ensure that these varieties could be uptaken for further breeding. And this pathway can lead to the release of these varieties for seed, for production of seed, for value chains, for the seed value chains, but it could also lead to their registration and their commercialization, which is a very important aspect of the seed value chain. However, since these varieties are not yet registered, we could not engage farmers in the production of seed, because for the production of seed, the seed has to be certified. So what we did was to engage with the Ministry of Agriculture's Seed Inspection Services and Certification Unit to train the farmers on production of quality declared seed, which they have been well trained to produce the seed. However, the farmers cannot directly commercialize this seed and package and sell the seed because of barriers that are related to commercializing seed varieties that are not registered. So under QDS, you can only sell seed that has been previously registered and that is on the national list. So this is not yet possible in Uganda and even in Ethiopia, but we are working with the Ministry of Agriculture's policy unit to see that if they can relax some rules on registering these varieties to allow for their commercialization. So what we did was also to engage the private sector in the product value chain. And because some of these varieties are very high in, of millet are very high in calcium, very high in iron, and with low tannin levels, which makes them very desirable for nutritional interventions, especially for things like baby foods and for composite flours, we have engaged with private sector to uptake some of the products. So the farmers are producing and selling the produce to the private sector, and the private sector is marketing this as super nutritious foods and producing composite flours for baby foods, which can then go into the market. And that is how we are engaging the farmers in productively in the product value chain. So one paradox that we found, we faced during this work was that although we have super highly nutritious varieties that perform well under climate stresses, and this is an immediate solution for farmers because climate change is not waiting for you to be able to breed, test and register varieties under DUS and multi-location trials. The farmers need an immediate solution for their food security. So although we were not able to release this seed, engage farmers in seed production and commercialization because of the barriers related to commercialization of seed that is unregistered, the policy environment is acting as a block. It's introducing barriers that will not enable farmers to be engaged in seed production or will not enable private sector to also to be engaged as seed producers. So this is one paradox that we faced. But we also have very important lessons that we learned about partnerships for scaling. We learned that it's very important to engage with the breeding programs, the National Agricultural Research Organizations, for the uptake and for the upscaling of these varieties. We also learned that it's very important to engage with local farmer groups, and especially through community seed banks for the adoption of these varieties, because the farmers are able to still access these varieties through the community seed banks which we have established. And although they are not able to produce and sell seed, but they are still able to grow these varieties for their own consumption and also for sale directly to the private sector with whom they have contractual arrangements to buy their produce. So another lesson that we also learned is, that apart from the partnerships and the institutions, is that engaging farmers at a very local level from the beginning of selecting these varieties is ultimately very important for their uptake and for the upscaling of these varieties, because the element of acceptability of these varieties, the element of them participating in their selection helps to in the adoption process for these varieties. So I think that is all from our end. Maybe Carlo can add something.
Okay. Well, thank you, Gloria. That was clear. That was really great. This is really delightful to listen to. Now we are going into breakout sessions. We will have 2 breakout sessions. Monica, if you can kindly put up my screen or my presentation, so that we can display the questions that you guys will be discussing in your breakout session, please. And we will have Gloria, Sitze, Domenico, and Carlo as the facilitators. And here are the questions that we would like you guys to address in your respective breakout sessions. The first one is, what are some key paradoxes that you came across in your own work around CSA, and how were you able to tackle these paradoxes creatively is one. And the other one is, in what ways have you been able to align local food security needs with private sector development objectives? Some of this could be maybe conflicting, as we also have had in Melissa's main address yesterday. So please, we have about 20 minutes for the session, and so we will go to this now. Thank you.
Although I didn't speak too much as I was busy listening, we had a broad group of people talking, well, also introducing themselves, and we mostly tried to look at the paradoxes that people found. And I think some of the issues that were brought forward is the formal and the informal, where markets, where people, or where we think that formal is better, but sometimes solutions are also found in the informal market. And there was a specific example on in the dairy value chain on finding markets in the dairy value chain. Another paradox that we found is solutions can be really great, technology can be wonderful. However, cultural differences or the cultural beliefs, and I think that was also brought forward in an earlier pitch, can also hold back the adaptation. The adoption of for us might be very evident solutions, but no, that was also brought forward. As one of the paradox. And we had a bit of a discussion, or there was a little bit of about the example of the seed varieties, and it is so obvious that the seed varieties, they're nutritious. Now everybody understands that that should be in the market. The farmers want it, private sector want it, but what is holding it back? It's policy. So how can we make sure that that happens? Well, of course, that is a policy issue. And even in our work in craft this morning, we had a discussion again about sunflower seed. It's still an issue, and it's still an issue probably for some years to come. But of course, there's also a lot of traditional knowledge. So how can we, instead of always thinking that the newest technology, we can go with the traditional knowledge. And as well, it's also part of how we work in craft is very much looking at how can you do the co-creation with private sector and government, bring evidence forward that investing in climate smart adaptation or mitigation is is a solution, but it should be a solution to a problem. If it's not your problem, it's not a solution. I guess let me keep it at there. But policy issue to bring forward. Well, we didn't really discuss the last point of the local food systems and private sector. So let me keep it here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for your remarks and reflections. Now I give over to Paul. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that Sietse went into the conversation thinking everybody knows what a paradox is, but that took a few minutes. But I mean, I'm getting it. So like the paradox is not to see how two things do not go together, but how to see how they might go together and find solutions. So the example of mitigation and adaptation. We had a few similar issues on the table. I think the formal, informal sector. My thought there was like, isn't that a problem in sectoral development in agriculture, no matter whether there's climate or not, or is it reinforced? So I would have loved to continue that discussion, but we continue looking at some others. One thing was the idea of using manure for biogas in dairy production, and then the thing came up like, well, is that the best climate solution? Because don't you want to use the nutrients for soil fertility or for soil health? So that was, I think, a good point, and I think it also shows that climate smart agriculture should not be sort of pushed into certain dogmas of saying like, okay, it should all be biogas, it should all be renewable energy, but it should look at the best solution for a certain context. Then the point that Adri of Geodata for Agriculture and Water made was that sometimes, and I think Marieke also referred to that, sometimes solutions are very rational and very well thought through, but not accepted anyhow. And that can either be commercial or cultural, or there might still be alternatives that are not climate smart, but still cheaper or more customary for farmers. So it's not a given that if you find the best solution, that you'll also have it implemented. I think I'll leave it at that, unless Sietse or Domenico have things to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We are coming to the end of the session. In fact, I think we only have a couple of minutes. I want to I would like to say really thank you so much for all of your contributions. It was really a fantastic session. And for me, I think too, just going forward and just listening into this whole session, we often think about scaling as just so much reaching large numbers of people. Yeah, we want, and then, yes, most of us do development work and we want to reach hundreds, millions of people. But it's often the process, and Bruce mentioned this in his remarks too, that the process of scaling is what is so complex. Yes, working with actors, getting the finances right. But I think also what I'm learning here is how context matters so much and why it is so important. We can have really, really fantastic innovations that have been proven and so on, but they may just be little things as simple as, okay, the distance to the market that Domenico was saying, or even like, okay, there's no electricity at night. So really those kinds of things really require you to be on the ground and really understand the context. And I think the value, what these projects really have shown, and the value of research is really understanding some of these paradoxes or these contextual factors for us to have more research informed and balanced balanced solutions to help us really make informed decisions, both for practice and policy when it comes to scaling proven innovations. So I really look forward to reading more or like see what comes out of in terms of your publications. I know that you are still not quite at the end of your projects, but really you have given us a lot, and I want to say thank you so very much. So now we've come to the end of the session, and when you log out, you have to get out completely of this session and then re-enter the main plenary. So yeah, I think that's how it's going to work. Monica, would you like to make some last technical comments or anything you would like to say?
Yes, thank you, Helena. Thanks, everyone. It was a very interesting discussion, and I really enjoyed this session. We indeed continue now the program in the main stream. So I put the link again here in the chat. Please join us for a final evaluation of the Food and Business Research Program in about 10 minutes. We'll be back in the mainstream. Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all for joining.
Now we've come to the end of the session, and when you log out, you have to get out completely of this session and then re-enter the main plenary. So yeah, I think that's how it's going to work. Monica, would you like to make some last technical comments or anything you would like to say?
Yes, thank you, Helena. Thanks, everyone. It was a very interesting discussion, and I really enjoyed this session. We indeed continue now the program in the main stream. So I put the link again here in the chat. Please join us for a final evaluation of the Food and Business Research Program in about 10 minutes. We'll be back in the mainstream. Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all for joining.